Good morning, everyone. Can I, by the nod of her head, I have my screen up and I see a face. So, Miss Sapp, if you can hear me, can you nod your head? Very good. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Again, can't see myself. So, what I wanted to share with you is, first of all, to thank you for taking your time out for this special meeting, just to so that we can make sure that we capture your thoughts, but really give you an overview of what the prioritized plan is for the recommendations that you shared. We know that over time, before I get into that, Nate, will you go to the next slide, please, just so that privacy statement. One more. And I won't insult you all by reading it to you, but I will give you 30 seconds just to read that so you know. I think basically it's a Zoom service and susceptible to some things. So just to be cautious, we just wanted to make you aware of the privacy and confidentiality associated with this. All right, next slide, please. So we determined that priority is necessary. As you know, we've been talking for the past 3 months about the priorities, the recommendations that you made. Starting around January, February, we've had meetings, developed pre-readings, and then after each meeting, there's been a recommendation or two. Over time, those numbers increased, and we probably were at 12 to 13 recommendations, and some of them had a part A, B, and C to them. We recognized that there were opportunities where those things were interconnected or intersecting or cross-cutting, and to develop the prioritized list based on that was not as efficient as we thought. So what we wanted to do was just take the list that you have, list of recommendations that have been provided, and then looking at the scope, we just wanted to have some conversation about your thoughts on priorities. Over the next month, we've scheduled maybe 5 meetings for you to sign up to join, just to join one. We wanted to make it convenient for others and all to join, so that we were able to get your feedback in smaller groups, because we do recognize when we're all together, it is difficult even when we break down into our small groups during the meeting. But the prioritization that we determine is necessary just to make a meaningful impact. It looks at the change of the scope. It will take time. It will be capacity, number of staff that we have, MSD, and as well as LEAs, funding associated with it. There's time for collaboration and involving our stakeholders, such as yourselves, and then our other internal as well as external stakeholders. And we want to be a hyper focus on just implementing it. I wanted just to reiterate, some things we can do fast, and sometimes we learn that by doing some things fast, we don't do well. But if we take our time, and that's what we're trying to do, so that once you measure twice, cut once, I want to make sure we get it right the first time, because we don't have time to miss or make mistakes. It's been reiterated over and over in this group that there's been some mistakes made over time. So if we can develop the plan, get your input, and move forward, that's the goal. The documents that you received a prioritized list and then a prioritized work plan in your email. That'll be what we'll be referencing over, just giving an overview at this meeting, but over the next 5 meetings, so that we can prioritize the list. It is a draft. It's our draft. These are MSDE's recommendations, a prioritized list based off of the recommendations that you shared. Again, it's MSDE's first draft of the recommendations, a prioritized list of what you shared. We are seeking your input. We want you to lean in and be able to provide input so that we can know how to move forward. The priorities implementation plan largely covers only the special ed work group meetings to date, meaning up to now. And if you think about it, you haven't even seen the significant disproportionality recommendation that we discussed, but we tabled at our last meeting. But I will note that you will see that in there, because we recognize that it is a priority for MSD, but really for the state of Maryland. And then all of those are subject to continuous revision as we consider further topics. This is August, and you know that the August meeting is being postponed or delayed, or the August meeting is being canceled. But during that time, we will be conducting 2 other small work sessions. Next slide. So moving forward, I'm going to, Mr. Levinson, I'll let you move us forward with the foundational priorities. And thank you all for joining. But again, I thought I opened up by thanking you for participating, but I do want to thank you all for who had been involved in the recommendations and the priorities. Mr. Levinson, you and your team, our MSDE staff, and of course, Ms. Zogby and the Special Executive Committee who provided feedback and consistent guidance moving forward. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Very excited to share with you, and hopefully everybody can hear me fine, the priorities. And again, you'll see in the longer document much more description and detail with all of these. You'll also notice that we're trying to do a few things as we prioritize. The first is, as Dr. Hickman mentioned, it would be outstanding to be able to do everything of every recommendation and do it right away, and completely unrealistic and no possibility of doing it well. So one thing is we just need to acknowledge that. But the other piece that really came through in your conversations over the last 6+8 months has been that there are certain foundational pieces that have to be put in place for other things to happen. And I think perhaps sometimes in the past, other states have struggled to really move the needle and fundamentally improve special education because some of the foundational pieces weren't yet in place. So we've really tried to take what we heard from you and recognize that some things have to change first so that other things can change later. So the prioritized plan starts with a number of foundational priorities, things that we have to do first before we can do other things well. And the first foundational priority was to ensure grade level achievement expectations, standards, and related monitoring. What has come through really clearly in so many of your conversations and so many of the recommendations is that special education should be an escalator or an elevator, pick your metaphor, to students with disabilities mastering grade level material, becoming proficient, and that what you told us is that those expectations in many LEAs aren't there yet, that the standards aren't deeply embedded into special education, that the goal and the reality should be mastering grade level material, and that the monitoring should reflect that as well. So we wanted to start. The first priority is creating the focus, the systems, the expectations, the standards, and the monitoring so that special education is viewed across the state as a pathway to grade level achievement. The second foundational priority says, hey, if we're going to do the first, we're going to get all kids to grade level, we need to expand the use of evidence-based best practices because the current practices aren't achieving that goal. And we know, and this has come up in multiple work group discussions, that the what works knowledge base as a country has expanded substantially, and that not every student with a disability is receiving evidence-based best practices that are designed to help them achieve grade level standards. So having helped create in foundational priority 1 that grade level focus, we need to expand the use of evidence-based best practices with a significantly larger role for general education. That's the next part of that sentence, the next part of that goal. We know, and you have told us over and over again, that improving outcomes for students with disabilities is as much about what happens in general education as it is in what happens in special education. And so the second foundational priority is trying to be very explicit about this as a gen ed, special ed effort. And as we're doing that, we also need to address some of the root causes of the significant disproportionality that Dr. Hickman mentioned. We have roughly 3/4 of the school systems in the state significantly disproportionate. And we also want to address the over-reliance on segregated placements for students with disabilities. So this is really about, if the first one is going to create the expectations and the standards, this is really creating the tools and clarifying the best practices and identifying the obstacles and overcoming the obstacles that have prohibited in the past vastly more students meeting grade level expectations. Now, if we were to do number one and then do number two, what we learned in one of our sessions with you, and I think we all knew it as well, but you really helped us think it through, is that we will not be able to implement these first two foundational priorities without enhancing the supply and retention of teachers, and developing teacher capacity, both special education and general education, ensuring that there are enough gen ed teachers and special educators, related service providers, and paraprofessionals with the knowledge, skills, and expertise to effectively teach students with disabilities. Again, that second foundational priority helps really clarify what are those best practices that will really feed into making sure that we have staff with the skills and the knowledge and the ability to implement those evidence-based practices. And we know as we do that, as we build the capacity and ensure general and special educators and other staff have those skills, we have to do all of that while creating more sustainable workloads and schools that better support educators. So the foundational priority number three clearly focuses on the staffing and human capital side of bringing numbers 1 and 2 to life. And hopefully folks are seeing that there is a logical order and flow to our thinking. Again, super excited to have the small groups to get your feedback, but did want to point out that there's a certain logic flow to how these evolved. A foundational priority number 4 is to have a significant focused effort on addressing disproportionality in the identification of students with disabilities, achievement outcomes, disciplinary action, LRE, and eligibility for participation in the alternative assessment. Obviously, disproportionality, as you can see and as in the discussion showed, covers a wide range of aspects. And we also know that if we're going to get all students to achieve and master at grade level, the disproportionality simply is too large, too widespread, and has over time been becoming more significant, that really needs a significant focus area, and that effort be systemic and structured, and quite honestly has to create methods of making this happen that may have to look a little different from the past, because this is a challenge like many of these others that have just persisted for a very long time. And the last foundational priority says, hey, if we're going to do numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, we have to make sure there's sufficient funding to do all of this. And that has come up multiple times in the conversations. So the foundational priority number 5 was to conduct an adequacy study of special education funding, and come out of that to frame legislative proposals, but to know how much money it will cost to do all of the things we want to do, and then to create some recommendations for how we can, the state and the school districts can have the funds needed to make opportunities or priorities 1, 2, 3, and 4 come to life. These 5 we've called the foundational priorities. We do think they cover a very large portion of what's been discussed in the working group. They cover a large portion of the recommendations. And we think as a package, they are coherent. And if you think about the chain and the weakest link, if any one of these is missing, it will, I believe, be difficult to do the others. Also, as Dr. Hickman mentioned, this reflects really the thinking and discussions we've had so far. We know we have a number of other sessions to come and other topics to come, so these may change or move or be expanded after more recommendations on more topics come. So we do believe this is the foundation. We know that it is not everything that needs to be done. So I wanted to talk about 2 other near-term priorities. And that's number 6 was to ensure LEA compliance with IDA's least restrictive environment requirements, including reducing the overuse of LREC and separate school placements while ensuring a broad continuum of services and supports are available. I think there are 2 points I want to make about this. And again, in the written document, there is more discussion of this. This is not a goal, and I know this came up in some of the discussions. As we think about the broad continuum of services, this is not a goal to end LREC or to end out of district placements. We know those are important and necessary and appropriate for some students, but we also know that there can be greater opportunity and greater movement towards a less restrictive environment for some students. And finding the right balance, creating the right systems so that it is actually the students' needs that are driving the placement rather than either the availability of programs or the lack of availability of options driving some of those decisions. So I do want to note that number 6 is about finding the right balance and creating the right systems so that kids are getting what they need. And lastly, the last near-term priority is to review, refine, and replace the Maryland Online Individual Education Program, i.e. the IEP software. And you'll see again for this one, both documenting what are the pain points and shortcomings, and then having to figure out whether, how do you move forward to address them. I think this is probably one in which the ultimate outcome is less definitive until more research is done, but we wanted to note that this is also on the radar screen. That said, we have 5 additional focus areas that have not yet been discussed at the working group: early childhood, infants and toddlers, the transition planning, parent and family partnerships, determining who's eligible to take the alternative assessments, and many elements related to discipline and identification of kids with emotional disabilities. I wanted to acknowledge that you're not seeing these areas in the first 7 priorities, not because they're not important, but because we haven't yet talked about them. You haven't yet given us recommendations on them, and when we do talk about them and do get recommendations, they will be incorporated into the prioritization plan and document. So you will see yet another flavor of these documents after we've completed all of the discussions. Oops. Now, as we thought about, okay, if those are the priorities, and again, in the small groups, you will get a chance to share and say things like, Dr. Hickman, Mr. Levinson, those are brilliant priorities. This is exactly what we need, and thank you so much for all that hard work. Or
That's
you
what I'm
may
looking forward to hearing.
Okay, me too, Dr. Hickman. Or people might be saying, hey, why isn't this in there? I don't understand that one. And that's to be expected. We really do want to have a conversation about the priorities. We felt that it would be valuable to take the first stab, and also valuable to create smaller groups to have those conversations. So today is not the day for the conversation, just our sense that it's too large a group and not the right format. But we do want your feedback. The other thing we felt that you deserved is, okay, if those are the priorities, give us some insight into how you're going to approach them. How long is it going to take? What are the steps you're going to take? Who's going to be included? That really turns to what we're calling the work plan or the implementation plan. And what you'll notice is, intentionally, for many of the priorities, there's a certain flow and flavor to how we want to implement them. And so the slide we're looking at now is the general structure for each of the different priorities. Is we really want to make sure that the work we're doing, that MSDE is doing, is creating, first of all, guidance and standards. That it is an important role for MSDE to say, hey, these are the evidence-based practices. These are the best practices. These are the expectations. That is a role for MSDE. But we also heard and saw through this year where MSDE to make the guidance and make the standards and to do it in isolation or with a small group of people, that is not going to be helpful, or we're not going to get much thanks. So what we've learned is that stakeholder feedback is critical. And you will see in the implementation plan significant opportunities and a cycle of gathering feedback before things are finalized, and gathering feedback from a wide group of folks, including the LEAs themselves, teachers, family, community members, advocates. There really is an incredibly strong commitment to getting feedback at every step of the way from a very wide group of folks. And that came very clear in our work with you this year, that how important that is and how beneficial that is. We've also committed to multiple cycles of revision, development feedback, revision. We need to get to a place where MSDE is putting first drafts out there. It is their work and their role, but not to consider that it's done because they're done with the first draft, and also to create an environment in which revision is seen as a normal and healthy part of doing the work, as opposed to, hey, we're really mad at what you did and let us change it, but really creating a cycle and a culture of revision based on feedback being a very healthy place we want to go. We really wanted to also make sure at every step of the way we have a thorough and comprehensive way of disseminating the standards and guidance and any other plans or documents or tools, making sure that they're usable and accessible. So we don't want it just to stop with this small group or stop with MSDE, but really get it out into the field. Once that's done, we're not done. And I think one of the pieces that I really appreciate about this plan, what we've seen in other states, is that life seems to mostly stop after dissemination. And what I mean by that is a number of state departments of ed will create very thoughtful documents and very thoughtful plans and very thoughtful standards, and they issue them, they email them, they share them at a conference for an hour. And then they somehow think that that's going to change the world. These work plans assume a great deal of technical assistance for LEAs and a great deal of professional development and efforts that will continue for years. And then lastly, at every step of the way, we want to be both monitoring implementation, but also incorporating into the state monitoring functions and systems. Are districts, in fact, doing these kinds of changes, doing it well? Are we moving the needle? Are we even implementing them? And we really want to make sure that monitoring is deeply embedded through this change process. So again, our sense is that there's a very comprehensive and realistic way of implementing those priorities. You will see as well, though, having all of these steps does take time. It slows the work down. Getting feedback slows things down, but makes it better. Revising makes it better, but all is going to take some time to do that. And then here, I'm not going to read this to you, but you can see that in the documents we shared for each of the priorities, there's a plan. This just gives you a sense of the key tasks and the time range, how long it will take, when it will start, when it will finish. And again, we wish things could move faster, but to do things well, we believe this is about as quick as practical. And again, in our small groups, we welcome your feedback. as on the implementation plan. And particularly, are there critical steps that you feel are missing? Is there a sense of timing is too fast, too slow? I suspect for many people will want this to move faster, and I empathize with that, but also acknowledge that this is a lot of work, and the goal is to do it well and to implement it well. And that's where the time comes. As far as next steps, I'll leave that over back to you, Dr. Hickman.
So in terms of next steps, I need you to all remember that if you must sign up for you must, in order to participate in the small work groups, you have to register like you did today. So please make sure you register for those work groups. Again, there's 5 of them. You should have received the schedule and opportunity. We will resend that if needed. And then after that, we'll be providing the revisions after we complete the special ed work group meetings, and you should receive an update at our next meeting. Right now, just a reminder, August 21st is canceled. Our next full meeting will be September, but during the next few weeks, we will have our 5 work groups.
And the other reminder I want to give folks, we're very eager for your feedback, but the plate is full. So one of the things we're going to ask you to do during the feedback sessions is that if there are things you want to add, then the question would ask you as well is there what's going to come out or what is going to get slowed down? But there are only 365 days in a year. And if your suggestions are to add a whole lot more work, which is fair and reasonable for discussion, know that it is likely to push something else out. There's just only so much that can get done. And at least as somebody who has worked with a lot of different states, I definitely feel important work. It's the kind of work that can really make a fundamental difference for kids, but it is a lot of work. There's a lot of work that many states have not been able to do well. And I know MSDE is very committed to both doing this, but doing it well. So we do want you to help wrestle with us what gets done first, what gets done second, and not everything can get done first. With that is the overview we wanted to share, so you get a voiceover as well as to read the document. We also know a whole bunch of folks have asked who weren't able to join so that they'll watch the video prior to the small group meeting. But let me stop sharing my screen and say that we are eagerly looking forward to the conversations later in the month to get your feedback so we can see how close to good we got and make it even better after our discussions.
Hey Nate, I think you were saying it, but I don't think you finished the thought. This has been recorded. We will share the recording for those who couldn't make this overview.
Great. With that, I don't think we have anything else to share today. We've accomplished what we wanted to, even a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Well, thank you all for joining. We'll give you back a few minutes of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to the small groups.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.